Hi, welcome to Left Foot Media. My name is Brendan Malone, and today we're going to be talking about the character of Rey, the one person who could have been a really interesting new character in the brand new Star Wars trilogy if it wasn't for the fact that she suffers from two very fatal writing flaws. Firstly, she has far too many characteristics of a Mary Sue. For those who don't know, a Mary Sue is the term that is used to describe a character that is seemingly perfect because they lack even basic flaws or are capable of doing things that it doesn't really make any sense for them to be capable of doing in the context of the story in which they are written. And for those who are wondering, no, this isn't sexism. Male characters can also be Mary Sues and are sometimes referred to as Marty Stews or Gary Stews. The problem with being a Mary Sue is that you can't really undergo character development or a substantive character arc because you are already too flawless and never in need of any meaningful improvement. This obviously makes you less interesting to the audience because there is never any substantial tension to be resolved in or about you as a character. And as I said, unfortunately, Rey suffers from this fatal flaw of being a Mary Sue. Just consider all the things she does in the new Star Wars trilogy that don't really make a lot of sense. Despite being abandoned by her parents to live the life of an uneducated scrap-scavenging slave on a dog-eat-dog planet of rogues and scoundrels, here are just some of the traits she displays that don't really seem consistent with that character. She can understand Wookiee perfectly. She can understand droid perfectly. She is an ace fighter pilot. She very quickly becomes an extremely powerful Force user without any training whatsoever. She becomes a skilled lightsaber warrior with no training, while Finn, a character who was actually trained as a soldier, is far less competent when he tries to use that same weapon. She is a highly proficient martial arts fighter who can easily defeat multiple stronger enemies all at once. Without any training whatsoever, she can resist and overcome the invasion of her mind by a powerful Force user and then quickly turn the tables and invade his mind with absolute ease. She is an expert engineer who displays an impossibly intimate knowledge of spacecraft, and to top it all off, she has no major character flaws, and the closest she comes to doing something that lacks virtue is when she experiences a very brief moment of temptation to sell BB-8 for an unusually large amount of food. This moment in The Force Awakens is actually very telling about the far too perfect way in which the character of Rey has often been written. You see, it really makes no sense at all that a person who was raised on a ruthless and violent planet of thieves and brigands, and who is living the life of a sweatshop worker, and who was raised without parents because they abandoned her as a very young child, would be so selfless and virtuous in her actions towards a droid she knows almost nothing about and has only recently met for the very first time. Especially when you consider that she was being offered an unusually large amount of the currency of her world, food, which is something that she possesses no reserves of, which she has to work unjustly hard to attain even a basic amount of, and without which she will starve. If Rey wasn't such a Mary Sue, the more reasonable thing for her character to do in such a situation would have been to hand over BB-8 and then later be motivated by something else, possibly the pangs of a nagging conscience or the prospect of an even greater reward than an unusually large amount of food, to subsequently change her mind, rescue BB-8 from the people she had sold him to, and then help him complete his mission. But Rey suffers from the affliction known as Mary Sue, so she doesn't do this. Instead, she takes a brief glance at all that food that is being offered to her and then quickly chooses to display heroic virtue in the face of such overwhelming temptation. This would be a difficult choice for anyone to make, let alone a young, starving slave labourer who has been raised to live out a Darwinian struggle for survival amongst despicable thugs. Yet Rey makes this choice with very little difficulty and no second thoughts. Apart from a few brief moments in The Force Awakens, like the scene where she is kidnapped from Maz Kanata's planet, or the start of the interrogation scene with Kylo Ren, and the moment she is knocked unconscious before awakening and then defeating Ren in a lightsaber battle, the only other moment where Rey even comes close to showing some form of major weakness is during her throne room confrontation with Supreme Leader Snoke in The Last Jedi. But even then, despite the fact that Snoke has just proven to her that she is nothing more than a vulnerable ragdoll that he could easily obliterate without even breaking a sweat, she maintains an attitude of defiant courage that is totally incongruous with the imminent and serious danger she now finds herself in. You could almost imagine her pulling a Deadpool and breaking the fourth wall to give the audience a wink and a wry smile before calmly uttering, "Don't worry folks, I've got this. We all know I'm not in any real danger of dying here." Then within moments, she's back in full Mary Sue mode as she dispatches multiple Praetorian guards with relative ease before coming to the rescue of Kylo Ren, who actually looked like he was at risk during that same battle. Rey is too much of a Mary Sue, and Mary Sues are not fun for an audience to be around because anytime they show up, the dramatic tension makes a pretty quick exit. Compare this to Luke Skywalker during his final confrontation with the Emperor in Return of the Jedi. Luke's emotions and actions display the very real danger that he finds himself in as the far more powerful Emperor Palpatine subjects him to wave after wave of excruciating and deadly Force lightning. He cries out with desperate agony and helplessness for his father to save him, just like a fearful little child would. And even when the Emperor is finally killed, Luke struggles back to his feet like a man who is barely capable of lifting a lightsaber, let alone wielding one with any proficiency. Even the brief moment of defiance he displayed in the seconds before the Emperor began his deadly lightning attack is tinged with trepidation on the part of Luke Skywalker. This scene is full of meaningful dramatic tension because Luke is not a Mary Sue, and we the audience know that the stakes are real. Even now, all these years later, and despite the fact that we all know the outcome, that confrontation is still captivating and still carries emotional weight, because we all know that it could have just as easily ended in Luke's death due to the fact that he's not a Mary Sue. Like I said, Mary Sues are bad for business if you're supposed to be in the business of creating dramatic tension. And ultimately, that is what cinematic storytelling of this particular type is supposed to be all about. But having too much Mary Sue is not the only fatal writing flaw that Rey has been subjected to. Despite the fact that she is meant to be the central hero of this new Star Wars trilogy, in the second movie, she has been written in such a way that if you removed her from the film, nothing drastic would need to be changed in the story structure for it to remain largely the same. Sure, you'd need to make some minor cosmetic changes here and there, but the story could still flow and look almost identical without her presence. Her first major contribution in the plot of The Last Jedi are her interactions with Luke on the planet of Ahch-To. But Rey is never trained by Luke while she is with him. Instead, her role in this part of the story is to usher Luke into the new trilogy. Then she has to rehabilitate him before finally motivating him to come to the rescue of the rebels against the evil First Order. But you don't need Rey to do any of these things. A series of dreams about impending doom and some lectures from Yoda on Ahch-To could have achieved all of the same things with the character of Luke, thus making this part of Rey's involvement in the story largely needless. Her second major contribution to the story of The Last Jedi are her interactions with Kylo Ren and Supreme Leader Snoke. And while these are a bit more important to the story than her interactions with Luke are, she is still not essential to these aspects of the plot either. Kylo Ren could have been motivated into his disloyalty against Supreme Leader Snoke based purely on the humiliation he was subjected to by Snoke earlier in the film and some severe guilt about the attack on his mother Leia. Throw in a few "what would my grandfather Vader do" internal conflict moments, and you've got everything you need to motivate Kylo Ren's overthrow of Snoke. The killing of Supreme Leader Snoke and his Praetorian guards could still take place in Snoke's throne room. All you'd need to do is substitute Finn and Rose into the scene instead of Rey as the captured heroes that Snoke is asking Kylo Ren to kill. Like I said, there would have to be some adjustments made, but these adjustments would be minor in the grand scheme of things, and this indicates how Rey is largely redundant to the progression and the structure of the story in The Last Jedi. This is the complete polar opposite of Luke's role in The Empire Strikes Back, a film in which Luke's character is an essential and indispensable element, and in which he is in real danger, and in which he also undergoes profound character development. But not so for Rey. She is largely the same character at the end of the film, just with the addition of a few extra experiences as what she was at the start of the film. Contrast this with Luke or Kylo in The Last Jedi, both of whom have been written with actual character arcs and neither of whom are Mary Sues, and as a result they undergo significant struggle and have experienced major character development by the time the final credits begin to roll. Luke has gone from being a nihilistic, angry, and self-absorbed recluse to a self-sacrificial hero who decides to face down his fears and confront the ultimate evil in the galaxy. And Kylo Ren goes from being a blindly obedient servant who is lacking in confidence and direction to the all-powerful head of the First Order who has come out from under the shadow of his master by killing him and who now embraces his new leadership role with ferocious determination. But not so for Rey. She is still largely the same character we met on Jakku at the beginning of The Force Awakens, only now she has a lightsaber, some unearned Force abilities, and a few new friends. Now let's consider Jyn Erso for a moment. Just like Rey, she was also written as the main character of her Star Wars story, Rogue One, and just like Rey, she also has experienced a difficult upbringing after the loss of her parents at a very young age. But unlike Rey, Jyn is actually an interesting character who is not a Mary Sue and who is absolutely essential to the story that she has been written into. In fact, when we first meet Jyn Erso in Rogue One, she sounds and acts exactly like the character of Rey would probably be acting if she hadn't been written as such a Mary Sue. Jyn has a rough exterior, her defences are up, she is cynical, and she is selfish. Exactly the traits you would expect from someone who was raised without her parents in a culture of struggle and suffering. She also has a meaningful character arc, where she is called, guided, and overcomes her own selfishness and demons to become a truly heroic character who is willing to make the ultimate sacrifice for something greater than herself by the end of the film. And on top of that, Jyn is only capable of doing things that it makes sense for her to be capable of doing. She doesn't have special powers and abilities that are inconsistent or unexplained in relation to her character. Most importantly of all, if you remove Jyn from Rogue One, you would need to make major alterations to the story because she is the essential linchpin which holds everything together and which guides us, the audience, through the unfolding story of Rogue One. If Rey had been written to look more like Jyn Erso, her character would make more sense. She would be far more interesting, and this would actually create a genuine storytelling tension and journey that would elevate the new trilogy from merely being a special effects and nostalgia bonanza to something much more akin to the greatness of the original Star Wars movie. So why was Rey written to be such a Mary Sue? I don't know the answer to that question, but I can't help but sense that when The Force Awakens was being written, Disney desperately wanted Rey to be a strong feminist icon for little girls, and so they threw out the rules of good storytelling in order to create a new and flawless female Jedi who would shine brightly with an unblemished and infallible perfection. One thing I do know for certain though is that Rian Johnson actually made this flaw in the writing of Rey even worse with his writing decisions in The Last Jedi, especially the decision to make her a nobody in the Star Wars universe. I actually like the concept of Rey's parents being unimportant. However, this is a real problem for Rey's character, as her parental lineage was the one thing that could have easily solved the problem of her being a Mary Sue. You see, if Rey actually was a somebody, and I don't mean a Kenobi here, I just mean she had some connection to the Force through her parents that made her truly unique and powerful, then this would give justification for all of the unique and powerful abilities she displays in this new trilogy. She would no longer be a Mary Sue if she was a character who had been born with unique powers. Powers that gave her abilities that make no sense for an average character in Star Wars, but which make perfect sense for a character who is truly unique in the world of Star Wars. This would also make a lot of sense and be totally consistent with the way that Rey is portrayed by Daisy Ridley in these new films. Thanks to Ridley's acting, Rey has an almost childlike countenance and purity about her, and she often displays a sort of social awkwardness with others during her interactions with them. She is kind of alien-like in this sense, like a fish out of water, in a way that makes it seem like she doesn't quite know how to be socially normal like the rest of the characters in Star Wars do. This would make perfect sense if Rey did actually possess a power that made her totally different and unique to any other Star Wars characters we've ever seen because of something to do with her family lineage. Again, this doesn't mean that she has to be a Kenobi. In fact, I think it would be far more interesting if this wasn't the case, and there are plenty of ways that Rey could have been bestowed with such powers without making her the daughter or granddaughter of Obi-Wan Kenobi. All it would have taken was a bit of creativity in the writing process of The Last Jedi. The other thing Rian Johnson could have done to make Rey less of a Mary Sue would have been to have her convert to the dark side of the Force in The Last Jedi. This would be totally consistent with the likely actions of a character who, after being raised in an awful situation without parents, and who suddenly found herself thrust into a galactic war complete with Jedis and powerful evil Force users, now found herself isolated and facing dashed hopes after her supposed mentor turned out to be a depressed old nihilist. This would also make much more sense of the way that Luke is written in The Last Jedi, as it would then become a motivating factor in driving Rey away from the Jedi Order and into the waiting arms of the dark side. Most importantly of all, by turning to the dark side, Rey would be proving to the audience that she isn't perfect and that she does have real weaknesses that need to be overcome in order to become better. Imagine an alternate version of The Last Jedi in which Rey had actually turned to the dark side as a result of her desperate search for the truth. A version in which Luke, and not Kylo Ren, had killed Supreme Leader Snoke in an actual man-to-man confrontation. A confrontation that had left Luke majorly weakened, and then Kylo Ren had seized on this weakness to strike Luke down. And a version that ended with two young dark side Force users, Rey and Kylo, no Jedis in sight, and a desperate and weakened band of rebels on the run from this new and evil threat. Now that would be a second film in a trilogy that actually made you desperate to return to the theatre for the third and final instalment to find out exactly how they were going to resolve such a serious moment of crisis in this new story arc. Unfortunately though, that version of the trilogy doesn't exist, so instead all we are left with is a main protagonist who is a largely uninteresting Mary Sue and whose story is unfolding in a trilogy that is now looking terminal thanks to the writing inadequacies of the second movie. And in case you're tempted to think that this is all just the petty and spiteful ravings of an angry man-child who doesn't want his Star Wars movies to contain female lead characters, think again, because you're dead wrong. I have young daughters, and I think that having female heroes in Star Wars movies is a great addition to the franchise that they would really get a kick out of. All I'm asking for is that my daughters be exposed to well-written female characters, not Mary Sues, who don't really offer young girls much in the way of positive messaging because they are so deficiently crafted. Just consider the lessons that Rey has to offer young girls. It's good to have friends. Some people are born special and powerful. It doesn't take hard work to do amazing things. Women don't need to be rescued. You don't need wisdom and expert guidance to become highly proficient at something. Being virtuous and doing the right thing is easy. There's not really much in the way of meaningful substance there, and in fact several of those messages are flat out false. Things become even more problematic when you add in the messages my daughters are getting from some of the other female characters in the new Star Wars trilogy. Like the message from Vice Admiral Holdo that keeping essential information secret from the rest of your team is a hallmark of great leadership. Or the message from Rose Tico that sacrificing yourself to save others is a bad thing to do. Now contrast those messages with the messages that young girls get from watching Jyn Erso in Rogue One. Messages like, you aren't born the most important person in the universe, but you can make important contributions to the world as a result of the decisions you make. Your past doesn't have to define your future. Self-sacrifice is the virtue that lies at the heart of true friendship and authentic meaning in life. You can't live life alone. You need community, and you need to learn to rely on other people. Doing the right thing takes effort, and it is not always the easiest choice to make. Sometimes you will have to do important things that no one will remember or praise you for doing, but that doesn't matter, you should still do those things anyway. You have the choice to be selfish or selfless with the way you live your life. Hope is the essential ingredient which drives a full and meaningful life. Doing the right thing sometimes means that you have to stand alone. The reason there is more substance to these messages is because Jyn Erso is a reasonably well-written character who undergoes a meaningful character arc as she overcomes challenges and obstacles that develop and change her as the plot of Rogue One unfolds. Rogue One definitely has its flaws, but the way Jyn Erso has been written is a darn sight better than the way Rey has. The really frustrating thing about all of this is that it didn't need to be this way, and the superior writing of the character Jyn Erso just reinforces that fact. On top of this, as already mentioned, there are moments, mostly in The Force Awakens, where Rey actually does display the traits of a character who isn't indestructibly perfect. Some are even written, directed, and acted in such a way as to show genuine vulnerability on the part of Rey. However, these moments are far too few and far too brief to overcome the far more numerous moments where Rey is a Mary Sue. When the final credits of The Last Jedi were rolling, I couldn't help but get the sense that it's now all just a matter of going through the motions for Rey in the third and final film of this new trilogy. Basically, she simply needs to show up, defeat Kylo Ren, and assume her woefully unearned mantle as the new Jedi hero who saved the galaxy, just like Luke Skywalker did, all those decades before he became a grumpy old nihilist proficient in the art of milking marine mammals. The only difference is that this time around, it took a whole lot less effort, a whole lot less risk, and a whole lot less training to conquer the supposedly extreme menace of the intergalactic man of mystery, Supreme Leader Snoke, and his all-powerful First Order. If this is supposed to be the new and improved Star Wars, then I would really hate to see what Disney making an absolute mess of things would look like. As per usual, I'd love to know your thoughts though, so please let me know in the comments section below whether you agree or disagree. And if you like the content I'm creating and you want to see more of it, then please support me on Patreon. There's a link in the description below and a link on screen at the end of this video. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time on Left Foot Media.